Some heroes are remembered for the lives they saved. But what about the lives shaped or lost because of their choices? In the world of Harry Potter series, Albus Dumbledore stands as a symbol of wisdom, power, and protection. But behind that calm voice and careful gaze lies a series of decisions that quietly changed everything. What if some of those choices led to suffering that could have been avoided? What if the greatest wizard of his time wasn't always right? Tonight, we look beyond the legend and into the shadows of his actions, where intention and consequence do not always align, and where even the wisest choices may come with a cost. The quiet weight of a great man. There are names in the wizarding world that feel larger than the stories they belong to, names that seem to carry their own quiet gravity, and among them, few are spoken with as much respect, wonder, and careful hesitation as Albus Dumbledore, a man whose presence lingers not only in the great halls of Hogwarts, but also in the memories of those who lived through war, loss, and moments that could never be undone. He is often remembered as the greatest wizard of his time, a figure of calm wisdom who stood between darkness and those who could not defend themselves. Someone who seemed to understand things long before others even realized there was something to understand. And yet, when we look more closely, when we allow the silence between his choices to speak, a different picture begins to form, one that is not as simple as legend would suggest. Because behind the long beard, the gentle voice, and the careful eyes that always seemed to be watching more than they revealed, there was also a man who made decisions. And those decisions did not exist in a safe and distant space, but in a world where every choice had weight, where every delay, every secret, every act of trust or hesitation could ripple outward in ways that could not be controlled, and sometimes could not be undone. It is easy to admire someone who wins in the end, to look at the final outcome and say that everything that happened along the way must have been necessary, must have been part of a greater plan that only a mind like his could see. But that way of thinking can hide something important, something quiet but deeply real, which is that even the wisest person can be wrong, and even the most careful plan can come at a cost that is far greater than anyone expected. Dumbledore was not just a symbol of good, and he was not just a distant protector guiding events from far away, because he was also someone who carried his own past, his own regrets, and his own fears. And these parts of him did not disappear when he became powerful, but instead stayed with him, shaping the way he saw the world and the way he chose to act within it. When people spoke of him, they often spoke of his brilliance, his deep understanding of magic, his ability to see patterns where others saw confusion. And while all of this was true, it is also true that brilliance can sometimes lead to a kind of distance, a belief that one can see the full picture when others cannot, and that this understanding gives the right to decide what others should or should not know. And this is where the story becomes more complicated, because when someone believes they see more clearly than everyone else, they may begin to carry their decisions alone, not out of cruelty, but out of a quiet certainty that they are protecting others from harm. And yet, in doing so, they also remove something important, which is the chance for others to understand, to prepare, and to choose their own path with open eyes. Dumbledore often kept things hidden, not because he enjoyed secrets, but because he believed that knowledge could be dangerous, that some truths could hurt more than they could help, especially when given too early or without the right context. And while this belief may have come from a place of care, it also created moments where people were left unprepared for what they would face. There is a kind of stillness that surrounds his decisions when we look back on them, a quiet pause where we can ask not only what he did, but why he did it, and what might have happened if he had chosen differently. And these questions do not take away from his greatness, but instead bring us closer to understanding it in a more complete way, because true understanding does not come from ignoring mistakes, but from looking at them clearly and without turning away. It is in these moments that we begin to see that Dumbledore was not simply guiding the story toward a perfect ending, but moving through uncertainty, making choices in a world where the future was never fully known, even to him. The idea of a greater good, appears quietly in the background of his life, like a distant echo that never fully disappears. And while it may not always be spoken aloud, it shapes the way he weighs decisions, the way he measures loss against what might be gained. And this way of thinking can lead to difficult choices. Choices where the line between right and wrong becomes less clear, and where doing what seems necessary may still lead to harm. When we look at the lives that were touched by his actions, we begin to see a pattern, not one of simple cause and effect, but one where his influence is always present, sometimes guiding, sometimes protecting, and sometimes, unintentionally, leading others into danger. It is important to remember that Dumbledore did not act without care, and he did not make decisions lightly, because he understood the risks and he understood the stakes, perhaps more than anyone else. But understanding does not always lead to the right outcome, and even the best intentions cannot prevent every consequence. There were moments when he chose to wait instead of act, moments when he chose to trust instead of intervene, and moments when he chose silence instead of truth. And each of these choices, small as they may have seemed at the time, became part of something larger, something that would eventually affect not just a few individuals, but many. When we think about the lives that were lost during the years of conflict, during the rise and fall of Lord Voldemort, it is natural to place the blame on the one who caused the harm directly. And there is no doubt that Voldemort's actions were the source of great suffering, but it is also worth asking how the actions of others, including Dumbledore, may have shaped the path that led to those moments. Not because he was responsible for the darkness, but because he stood in a position where his choices could influence how that darkness was faced. There is something both comforting and unsettling about the way Dumbledore is remembered, because he represents hope, wisdom, and the idea that good can stand against evil. And yet, when we look more closely, we begin to see that even hope can come with a cost, and even wisdom can lead to decisions that are not perfect. This does not make him a villain, and it does not erase the good that he did, but it does remind us that people are more than the roles they are given, and that even the greatest among them can carry mistakes that shape the lives of others in ways they never intended. As we move deeper into this story, it becomes less about judging Dumbledore and more about understanding him, about seeing the full picture of who he was, not just as a leader or a symbol, but as a person who lived, chose, and sometimes made decisions that carried consequences far beyond what anyone could control. And in that understanding, there is a quiet question that stays with us, one that does not demand an easy answer, but instead invites us to think, to reflect, and to listen carefully to the space between action and outcome, where intention and consequence meet. How many lives were shaped by his guidance, and how many were lost along the way, not because he wished it, but because the path he chose allowed it to happen? It is a question that does not have a simple number, and perhaps it never will, but it is one worth asking, because in that question, we begin to see the true weight of his legacy, not as a perfect story of good triumphing over evil, but as something more human, more uncertain, and more real, where even the brightest light can cast a shadow, and where even the wisest man must live with the choices he made. The dream of the greater good. There was a time, long before the long beard, the calm voice, and the quiet authority that many would later trust without question, when Albus Dumbledore was not yet the careful man people came to know, but instead a young wizard filled with sharp thoughts, strong emotions, and a restless need to understand the world and his place within it. And it was during this time, when his mind was bright but his path was not yet steady, that he met someone who would change everything, someone who saw the world in a way that felt exciting, bold, and dangerously clear. That person was Gellert Grindelwald, a young wizard who carried not only great talent, but also a powerful belief that the world was broken and needed to be reshaped, not slowly and gently, but with strong hands and firm control. And when these two minds came together, it was not a quiet meeting of friends, but something more intense, more electric, like two ideas colliding and forming something larger than either one alone. They spoke for long hours, shared thoughts that others might have feared to even say out loud. And in those conversations, a dream began to take shape, a dream that felt, at least to them, like something noble and necessary. It was a dream built around a phrase that would follow Dumbledore for the rest of his life. A phrase that sounds simple at first, almost gentle in its wording, but carries a heavy meaning beneath it. And that phrase was, "for the greater good," a belief that the world could be guided, shaped, and even controlled if it meant creating a better future for more people. At its surface, it sounds like something kind, like a wish to protect others, to prevent suffering, and to bring peace. But when we look closer, when we slow down and listen to what it truly means, we begin to see that it also carries a quiet danger, because it asks a difficult question without saying it directly, which is whether it is right to make choices for others, even if those choices take away their freedom. For Dumbledore, this idea did not come from cruelty, and it did not begin as a plan to harm anyone, but instead from a mix of grief, hope, and a deep belief that things could be better than they were. And in that moment of youth, when emotions can feel stronger than caution, it became easy to believe that he and Grindelwald were not just dreaming, but discovering something important, something that others simply could not see yet. They imagined a world where wizards would no longer hide, where they would take their place openly, guiding those without magic, not as equals, but as leaders, believing that their power gave them the right to decide what was best. And this is where the dream begins to shift, where something that might sound hopeful starts to reveal its darker side, because while it spoke of peace and order, it also placed one group above another, and it justified that position by saying it was necessary, that it would prevent greater harm, that it would lead to a safer world, and in doing so, it quietly pushed aside the idea that all people should have the right to choose their own path, even if that path is uncertain or imperfect. It is not hard to see why this idea felt powerful, especially to two young wizards who believed they could see the bigger picture, who believed they understood things others did not, and who felt ready to act on that understanding. The bond between Dumbledore and Grindelwald was not just built on shared ideas, but also on admiration, on the feeling of being seen and understood in a way that few others could offer. And this made their connection even stronger, because it is often easier to accept bold and risky beliefs when they are shared with someone who feels just as certain, just as convinced, and just as ready to move forward without looking back. In those moments, it becomes harder to question, harder to pause, and easier to believe that the path ahead, no matter how difficult, is the right one. But even within this growing dream, there were quiet signs that not everything was as simple as it seemed. Small moments where the idea of control began to feel heavier, where the cost of this greater good began to appear, even if only faintly. And yet, instead of stepping back, instead of asking whether the dream itself needed to change, Dumbledore allowed himself to continue, to move forward alongside Grindelwald, trusting not only the idea but also the person who stood beside him. This choice, this willingness to follow a path that placed belief above caution, became one of the first and most important moments in Dumbledore's life, because it showed something that would return again and again in different forms, which is the tendency to believe that a strong vision, when held with enough certainty, can justify the risks it creates. It was not a loud decision, not something marked by a single moment that could easily be pointed to, but rather a gradual shift, a quiet acceptance of an idea that felt right, even if it was not fully understood. And yet, while Dumbledore stood at the edge of this belief, there was also something within him that did not fully agree, something quieter, more uncertain, that questioned whether power should be used in this way, whether control, even for a good reason, could truly lead to peace. And this inner conflict did not disappear, but instead stayed with him, creating a tension between what he believed and what he felt. This tension is important because it reminds us that he was not blind to the risks, and he was not without doubt, but rather someone who struggled between two paths, one that promised order and one that required restraint. When we look back on this time, it becomes clear that this was not just a passing phase or a mistake that could be easily forgotten, but a moment that shaped the way Dumbledore would think for the rest of his life. Because once someone accepts that a greater goal can justify difficult choices, even if only for a short time, that idea does not simply disappear, but instead becomes part of how they understand the world, part of how they weigh decisions, and part of how they choose between action and hesitation. This early alliance with Grindelwald did not last forever, and it did not end in the way either of them might have expected, but the belief they shared, the idea that the world could be shaped for a greater purpose, remained, changing form over time, becoming less direct, less openly spoken, but still present in quieter ways. It would appear later in decisions that involved secrecy, in moments where information was withheld, in choices where others were guided without being fully informed, and in situations where the outcome was seen as more important than the process. It is important to understand that Dumbledore did not continue to believe in control in the same way that Grindelwald did, and he did not become the same kind of person because he stepped away from that path, and he chose not to follow it to its end. But stepping away does not erase the beginning, and it does not remove the influence of that early belief. Instead, it leaves behind a mark, something subtle but lasting, that shapes future decisions in ways that may not always be obvious. When we think about the idea of the greater good, it can be easy to focus only on its intention, to see it as a wish for a better world, and to forget the cost that can come with it. But when we place it in the context of Dumbledore's life, we begin to see that it is not just a phrase, but a turning point. A moment where a young wizard chose to believe in something that felt right, even if it carried risks that could not yet be fully seen. And so, as we continue to look at the life of Dumbledore, we carry this moment with us, not as a simple mistake, but as the beginning of a pattern, a way of thinking that would return in different forms, sometimes guiding him toward wise choices, and sometimes leading him into decisions that would have consequences far beyond what he intended. Because in the end, the dream of the greater good was not just something he believed once, but something that stayed with him, quietly shaping the way he saw the world and the way he chose to act within it, even when he tried to move beyond it. Ariana Dumbledore, the first cost. There are moments in a person's life that do not feel loud when they happen, moments that pass in a blur of emotion, confusion, and fear, and yet those same moments can echo for years, shaping every choice that comes after. And for Albus Dumbledore, one of those moments came not in a grand hall or during a great battle, but in a quiet place, close to home, where the line between love and loss became impossible to separate, and where a single event would leave a mark that no amount of wisdom or power could ever fully erase. Before he was known as a great wizard, before people spoke his name with respect and trust, Dumbledore was a brother, part of a family that carried its own quiet struggles. And at the center of those struggles was his younger sister, Ariana, a girl who lived in a world that was both close and distant at the same time. A world shaped by something that had happened to her when she was very young, something that left her fragile, unpredictable, and often unable to control the magic inside her. She was not like other children, and because of this, she was kept away from the outside world, hidden not out of shame, but out of fear, because her magic could become dangerous without warning, and the people who loved her were trying, in their own way, to keep her safe. Ariana's life was quiet, but it was not peaceful, because even within the safety of her home, there was tension, worry, and a constant sense that something could go wrong at any moment. And for Dumbledore, this created a deep conflict, because he cared for his sister, but he also felt the pull of something larger, the desire to explore, to learn, and to step beyond the limits of the life he had been given. This conflict did not have a simple answer, and it became even more complicated when Gellert Grindelwald entered his life, bringing with him ideas that felt exciting and full of possibility, ideas that seemed to offer a way forward, not just for Dumbledore, but for the entire wizarding world. As Dumbledore and Grindelwald grew closer, their conversations became more intense, their plans more detailed, and their belief in their shared vision stronger. And yet, while their minds were focused on the future, on the idea of a world reshaped for what they believed was the greater good, there was something closer, something more immediate, that was being left behind. And that was Ariana, whose needs, fears, and fragile state did not fit easily into their grand plans. This was not because Dumbledore stopped caring about her, but because his attention was divided, pulled between the life he had and the life he believed he was meant to create. At the same time, his brother, Albus Dumbledore, saw things differently, not through the lens of big ideas or future plans, but through the simple and clear understanding that Ariana needed protection, care, and stability, and that anything that threatened that stability, no matter how important it seemed, was a risk that could not be ignored. This difference in perspective created tension between the brothers, a quiet disagreement that slowly grew into something stronger, something harder to ignore, because it was not just about ideas, but about responsibility, about what mattered most, and about what could be sacrificed and what could not. The moment that changed everything did not come with warning, and it did not allow time for careful thought or calm decision, but instead arrived suddenly, as arguments often do, when emotions are already high and words begin to carry more weight than they should. What started as a disagreement turned into a confrontation, and what should have remained a conversation became something far more dangerous, because magic, once drawn into conflict, does not always follow intention, and it does not always stop when it should. In that moment, Dumbledore, Grindelwald, and Aberforth stood not as thinkers or planners, but as individuals caught in a surge of emotion, each driven by their own beliefs, their own fears, and their own sense of what was right. And the duel that followed was not a measured or controlled exchange, but something chaotic, something fueled by anger and urgency, where spells were cast not with careful aim, but in the heat of the moment, without full awareness of what they might cause. And then, in the middle of that chaos, something happened that none of them could take back, something that would end the life of Ariana, not through a clear and direct act that could be easily traced, but through a moment so uncertain that even those who were there could never fully say whose spell had caused it. She was struck down, not as part of the fight, but as a result of it, a victim not of intention, but of consequence, and in that instant, everything changed. The silence that followed was not just the absence of sound, but something deeper, something heavier, because it carried with it the realization that no matter what they had believed, no matter what they had planned, a life had been lost, and it was a life that should have been protected, a life that depended on them, and now it was gone. For Dumbledore, this was not just a loss, but a breaking point, a moment where the dream he had been building with Grindelwald suddenly felt distant, unclear, and overshadowed by something far more real. What made this moment even more difficult was the uncertainty, the fact that Dumbledore could never be sure whether it was his own spell that had caused Ariana's death, and this uncertainty became a quiet burden, something that stayed with him, not as a clear memory that could be understood and accepted, but as a question that had no answer, a possibility that could never be confirmed or denied. This kind of doubt does not fade easily because it does not allow closure, and instead it lingers, shaping the way a person sees themselves and the choices they make. After this, Dumbledore stepped away from Grindelwald, not just physically, but in belief, because whatever they had shared before could no longer exist in the same way, and the idea of the greater good, which had once felt powerful and clear, now carried a different meaning, one that included loss, regret, and the understanding that even the best intentions could lead to harm when they are placed above care and responsibility. This moment also changed the way Dumbledore saw power, because he had experienced, in the most personal way possible, how quickly things could go wrong, how easily control could be lost, and how deeply the consequences could cut. And from that point on, he became someone who did not seek power in the same way, someone who stepped back from positions that would place him in control, not because he lacked the ability, but because he feared what he might do with it, or what might happen if he made the wrong choice again. This is why, in the years that followed, Dumbledore often chose distance instead of direct control, guidance instead of command, and influence instead of authority, because he believed that keeping himself at a certain distance might prevent the kind of mistake that had already cost him so much. But this distance also came with its own problems, because stepping back can sometimes mean allowing things to unfold without enough intervention, and choosing not to act can be just as powerful and just as risky as choosing to act. The loss of Ariana did not simply make Dumbledore more careful, but also more hesitant, because every decision carried with it the memory of that moment, the awareness that even a small misstep could lead to something irreversible. And this hesitation, while understandable, would later shape the way he handled situations that required quick and clear action. It made him think longer, wait more, and sometimes choose silence over immediate response, not out of neglect, but out of fear of repeating the past. And so, when we look at the life of Dumbledore, it is important to see this moment not as something separate, but as something deeply connected to everything that came after, because the choices he made later, the way he handled power, the way he trusted others, and the way he sometimes held back, all carry traces of this loss. It is the quiet beginning of a pattern, one where caution and hesitation are not just strategies, but responses shaped by grief. Ariana's death was not just a tragedy, but a turning point, one that revealed the cost of choices made in moments of belief and emotion, and one that stayed with Dumbledore long after the moment itself had passed. It is the first clear example of how his decisions, even when not meant to harm, could lead to outcomes that could not be undone. And it is this understanding that begins to shape the larger question of his life, the question of how many of his choices, made with care and thought, still carried consequences that reached further than he ever intended. And in that quiet space between intention and outcome, between what was meant and what happened, we begin to see not just the story of a great wizard, but the story of a person who lived with the weight of a single moment, a moment that would follow him through every decision, every hesitation, and every attempt to do what he believed was right, even when he could never be fully certain that it would be enough. Refusing power, creating distance. There is a quiet kind of power that does not sit on a throne, does not wear a title, and does not speak through official orders, and yet still shapes the world in ways that are deep and lasting. And for Albus Dumbledore, this was the kind of power he chose to hold, not because he could not take a higher position, but because he believed, with a calm certainty that came from experience, that stepping too close to direct control might lead him back to mistakes he never wanted to repeat. It is often said that he was offered the role of Minister for Magic more than once, that he could have led the entire wizarding world through official authority, through laws, decisions, and clear command, and yet each time he refused, stepping away from the highest seat of power and choosing instead to remain at Hogwarts, guiding from a place that felt safer, quieter, and more distant. At first, this choice seems wise, even noble, because after everything that had happened in his past, especially the loss that shaped him so deeply, it makes sense that he would be careful, that he would not want to place himself in a position where every decision could carry wide and immediate consequences. And in many ways, this refusal can be seen as an act of restraint, a sign that he understood his own limits and did not trust himself to hold power without risk. But when we look closer, when we move beyond the surface of this decision, we begin to see that stepping away from power does not mean stepping away from influence, and sometimes, influence without responsibility can create a different kind of danger, one that is harder to see, but just as important to understand. Because even without the title of minister, Dumbledore remained one of the most respected and listened to figures in the wizarding world, someone whose words carried weight, whose opinions shaped decisions, and whose presence alone could guide the direction of events. And this meant that while he did not hold official power, he still had the ability to affect what happened, often in ways that others did not fully notice. He became someone who could suggest rather than command, someone who could guide rather than control. And while this may seem like a gentler way of leading, it also created a space where his influence could operate without the same level of accountability that comes with a formal role. When a person holds a position like Minister for Magic, their decisions are visible, their actions can be questioned, and their responsibility is clear because they are the one officially in charge. And this visibility, while difficult, also creates a form of balance, because it allows others to see what is being done and to respond when something goes wrong. But when influence is held from the shadows, when guidance comes without official responsibility, the situation becomes more complex, because the person guiding events is not always the one who must answer for them. And this can create a gap between action and accountability, a quiet space where decisions can shape outcomes without being directly connected to their source. Dumbledore's choice to remain outside of formal power did not remove him from the center of important decisions, but instead placed him in a position where he could affect those decisions from a distance, often working through others, often allowing events to unfold while he watched, guided, and occasionally intervened when he believed it was necessary. This approach allowed him to avoid the pressure of constant control, but it also meant that he was not always present at the moment when action was needed most, and that distance, while protective for him, could create risks for others. There is something subtle about this kind of leadership, something that can easily be mistaken for wisdom because it avoids direct conflict and allows others to take visible roles, but it also carries the risk of delay, because when decisions are not made directly, when guidance comes in hints and suggestions instead of clear action, things can take longer to unfold. And in situations where time matters, where danger is growing, this delay can have serious consequences. Dumbledore often believed that waiting, watching, and understanding the full picture was the best way to act. And in many cases, this approach helped him see patterns that others missed. But it also meant that there were moments when action came later than it could have, moments when a more direct response might have changed the outcome. This distance from power also affected the way others saw him, because while they trusted him, respected him, and often followed his guidance, they did not always fully understand his plans. And this lack of clarity could lead to confusion, to decisions being made without full knowledge, and to situations where people acted based on partial understanding rather than complete information. When a leader stands openly at the front, their intentions are clearer, even if not everyone agrees with them. But when a leader works from the shadows, even with good intentions, it becomes harder for others to see the full path, and this can lead to actions that do not fully align with the original purpose. There is also the question of responsibility, a question that becomes more complicated when someone chooses influence over direct control. Because if a decision leads to harm, who carries that responsibility? Is it the person who acted, the one who made the visible choice, or the one who guided the situation from behind, shaping the path without stepping fully into it? For Dumbledore, this question is not simple, because while he often avoided direct authority, his influence was always present, and the outcomes of events cannot be separated from the role he played in guiding them. It is important to understand that Dumbledore did not refuse power out of laziness or fear of effort, but out of a deep concern about what power could do, both to him and to others. And this concern was not without reason, because he had already seen how easily strong beliefs could lead to dangerous paths, and how quickly control could turn into something harmful. His refusal was, in many ways, an attempt to prevent that from happening again, an effort to protect others by limiting his own authority. And yet, this protection came with its own cost, because it created a form of leadership that was less direct, less visible, and sometimes less immediate. When we look at the larger picture, we begin to see that Dumbledore's choice was not simply between power and no power, but between two different ways of holding influence, one open and official, and the other quiet and indirect. And while he chose the second path, believing it to be safer, it did not remove the risks, but instead changed their shape. Instead of the clear dangers of direct control, there were now the quieter risks of distance, delay, and limited visibility, risks that could grow slowly and become significant before they were fully understood. There is a certain calm in the way Dumbledore carried this role, a sense that he was always thinking, always observing, always trying to see beyond the moment to what might come next. And this calm made others feel safe, made them believe that things were under control, even when they were not. And this belief, while comforting, could also create a false sense of security, because it suggested that someone else was managing the situation, that someone else had already thought of everything, and this could lead to less questioning, less urgency, and less action from those who trusted him. In the end, the choice to refuse power did not remove Dumbledore from the center of events, but instead placed him in a different kind of position, one that allowed him to guide without being seen as the one in charge. And while this may have felt like a way to avoid the mistakes of the past, it also created new challenges, new risks, and new questions about how leadership should be carried. It shows us that stepping away from authority does not mean stepping away from responsibility, and that influence, even when held quietly, can shape outcomes in ways that are just as powerful as direct command. And so, as we continue to look at the life of Dumbledore, we begin to understand that his refusal of power was not a simple act of wisdom, but a complex decision, one that carried both care and consequence, one that protected him from certain risks while creating others, and one that reminds us that leadership, whether held openly or quietly, always comes with weight, always carries responsibility, and always leaves a mark on the world it touches, even when it tries to remain unseen. Leaving Harry with the Dursleys, there are choices that are made in moments of urgency, when danger is close and time feels short, and in those moments, even the wisest person must decide quickly what will protect a life, what will keep someone safe from harm that is immediate and real. And for Albus Dumbledore, one of those choices came on a night that was both quiet and filled with the echoes of something terrible that had just ended. The night when a child survived something no one else had, and that child was Harry Potter. Harry was left without parents, without a home, and without any understanding of what had happened. And in that fragile moment, when the wizarding world was still trying to understand the fall of Lord Voldemort, Dumbledore made a decision that would shape Harry's entire life. A decision that at first seems simple, even necessary, but becomes more complex the longer we sit with it, because it placed Harry not in a loving, magical home, not among people who could guide him through the truth of who he was, but instead with his only remaining family, the Dursleys, a family that did not want him, did not understand him, and would never treat him with the care that a child needs. On the surface, the reason for this choice was clear, and it was rooted in something powerful and deeply magical, something known as blood protection, a form of safety that came from the sacrifice of Harry's mother, a protection that could only remain strong if Harry lived with someone who shared that same blood, someone connected to his mother in a direct way, and in this case, that person was Petunia Dursley. This protection was not a simple charm or a spell that could be easily replaced, but something ancient, something tied to love and sacrifice. And Dumbledore understood that keeping Harry alive, especially in the years when danger might return, was the most important goal. And so, from a certain point of view, the decision made sense, because it focused on survival, on creating a barrier that would keep Harry hidden and safe from those who might wish to harm him. And in a world where enemies could return and threats could rise again, this kind of protection was not something to take lightly. But when we look beyond the immediate need for safety, when we step back and consider what it means for a child to grow up in a place where they are not wanted, where they are treated as a burden rather than a person, the decision begins to carry a different weight, one that is not about magic, but about something more human. The Dursleys did not see Harry as a child who needed care, guidance, and kindness, but as a reminder of something they feared and disliked, something that did not belong in their world. And because of this, they treated him in ways that were cold, unfair, and often harmful, not always through loud or obvious cruelty, but through neglect, through small actions that built up over time, actions that told Harry, again and again, that he was less important, less valued, and less worthy of love than those around him. He was given less space, less attention, and less understanding. And these things, while they may seem small when looked at individually, create a pattern that shapes how a child sees themselves. Dumbledore knew that the Dursleys were not kind people, and he was not unaware of the risk that Harry would not be treated well, but he believed that the protection offered by blood was worth that risk, that keeping Harry alive was more important than ensuring he was happy. And this belief reveals something important about the way he made decisions, because it shows a willingness to accept a certain kind of harm in order to prevent a greater one. In this case, the greater harm was death, and the lesser harm was a childhood without warmth, without comfort, and without the kind of care that helps a person grow with confidence and trust. This is where the choice becomes difficult to fully accept, because while survival is important, it is not the only thing that matters, especially for a child, because children do not just need to live, they need to feel safe, to feel loved, and to understand that they have value. And when these things are missing, even if the body is protected, the mind and the heart can still carry wounds that are not easily seen. Harry grew up believing that he was unwanted, that he was a burden, and that he had to accept whatever treatment he was given. And these beliefs did not come from nowhere, but from years of living in a place where he was not treated as an equal member of the family. There is also the question of whether there were other options, whether it was truly necessary to place Harry in that environment, or whether a different choice could have been made, one that balanced both safety and care. And while the magic of blood protection is a strong reason, it is not the only factor that could have been considered, and this is where the decision becomes something we must examine more closely, not to judge too quickly, but to understand fully. Could Harry have been placed with someone from the wizarding world who could offer both protection and kindness? Could the protection have been strengthened in another way, or combined with a safer environment? These questions do not have simple answers, but they are important, because they remind us that even necessary decisions can have alternatives that are worth exploring. As Harry grew older, the effects of his childhood became more visible, not always in obvious ways, but in how he reacted to the world, how he handled relationships, and how he saw himself. He learned to endure rather than to expect care, to accept hardship rather than question it. And while these traits helped him survive, they also made it harder for him to trust, to open up, and to believe that he deserved something better. This is the long-term cost of the decision, a cost that goes beyond physical safety and touches on emotional and mental well-being, something that is just as important, even if it is harder to measure. Dumbledore's role in this is not simple, because he did not abandon Harry completely, and he did watch over him from a distance, ensuring that he was protected, that he remained safe from the threats that might come, and that when the time was right, he would be brought into the wizarding world and given the chance to understand who he truly was. But this distance also meant that he was not there for the daily struggles, not present for the small moments where care could have made a difference, and not able to change the environment in which Harry was growing up. This creates a contrast between intention and outcome, because Dumbledore intended to protect Harry, to keep him alive, and to prepare him for a future where he would play an important role, and in many ways, he succeeded in that goal. But the path he chose to reach that goal carried its own form of harm, one that did not come from enemies or dark magic, but from the absence of kindness and understanding during the years when Harry needed it most. When we look at this decision as part of a larger pattern, we begin to see something that connects it to other choices Dumbledore made, which is the tendency to prioritize long-term outcomes over immediate well-being, to focus on what must be achieved rather than what is being experienced in the present. And while this approach can be effective in planning and strategy, it can also overlook the human side of those involved, the feelings, needs, and struggles that exist in the moment. And so, the question that remains is not simply whether Dumbledore was right or wrong, but whether the balance he chose was the best one, whether survival should always come before care, and whether a child should be asked to endure hardship in order to serve a greater purpose later in life. These are not easy questions, and they do not have answers that can satisfy everyone, but they are important because they help us understand the full weight of the decision, not just as a moment in a story, but as a choice that shaped a life. In the end, Harry did survive, and he grew into someone strong, brave, and capable of facing the challenges ahead. But that strength did not come without cost, and it did not erase the years of neglect that came before it. It is a reminder that survival and care are not the same, that protecting a life is not the same as nurturing it, and that the choices we make, even when they are meant to help, can leave marks that stay long after the danger has passed. And in that quiet space between what was needed and what was lost, we begin to see the full meaning of the decision, not just as an act of protection, but as a moment where one kind of safety was chosen over another, where life was preserved but comfort was set aside, and where a child was kept alive but left to grow in a place where love was something distant, something uncertain, and something he would have to learn to find on his own. Secrets over trust. There is a kind of silence that does not come from the absence of words, but from the careful choice not to speak. And in the life of Harry Potter, this silence was always present in ways that were quiet but deeply important, because it shaped not only what he knew, but also what he did not know. And sometimes, what a person does not know can be just as powerful and just as dangerous as what they do. At the center of this silence was Albus Dumbledore, a man who understood more than almost anyone else about the threats Harry would face, the role he would have to play, and the truth of the connection between Harry and Lord Voldemort. And yet, even with this knowledge, he chose not to share everything, not all at once, and not when it might have made a difference. This choice was not made out of carelessness, and it was not because Dumbledore wished to deceive Harry for his own gain, but because he believed that certain truths carried weight, a kind of heaviness that could change a person if given too early, especially to a child who had already faced more than most. And in his mind, protecting Harry meant more than keeping him physically safe. It also meant shielding him from knowledge that might bring fear, confusion, or a sense of responsibility that he was not ready to carry. It is a belief that feels gentle at first, almost kind, because it comes from the idea that children should not be burdened too soon, that they should be allowed to grow before facing the full truth of the world. But when we look closer, when we follow the path that this silence created, we begin to see that withholding truth can shape events in ways that are not always helpful, because knowledge is not only a burden, it is also a tool, something that allows a person to understand what they are facing, to prepare, and to make choices with clearer awareness. When Harry entered the wizarding world, he stepped into a life filled with questions, with strange connections, with moments that did not fully make sense. And while some of these mysteries were natural, part of learning something new, others were tied to deeper truths that were deliberately kept from him. Dumbledore often stood at a distance, watching, guiding in small ways, offering just enough information to move things forward, but never the full picture. And this created a pattern where Harry was always one step behind the truth, always reacting rather than preparing, always discovering things in moments of crisis rather than understanding them in moments of calm. This pattern can be seen again and again in the way Harry learned about Voldemort's past, in the way he began to understand the connection between them, and in the way he faced challenges that he did not fully see coming. One of the most important beliefs behind this choice was the idea that Harry needed time, that growing up without the full weight of his destiny would allow him to develop as a person first, before becoming someone who had to face great danger. And this belief is not without reason, because placing too much responsibility on a child too early can take away their chance to simply be a child, to learn, to make mistakes, and to find their own sense of self. Dumbledore wanted Harry to have that chance, even if it was limited, even if it came in a world that was already filled with risk. But the world Harry lived in was not safe, and it did not wait for him to be ready, because the threats he faced were real, immediate, and growing. And in such a world, the The delay of knowledge can become a form of risk, because when a person does not fully understand what they are facing, they may not be able to act in the best way, even if they are brave, even if they are willing to try. There were moments when Harry walked into danger without knowing how close it truly was, moments when he trusted things that should have been questioned, and moments when he was forced to learn important truths in the middle of fear and confusion rather than in a place where he could think clearly. This is where the idea of protection begins to shift, because while Dumbledore believed he was protecting Harry by keeping certain truths hidden, the result was that Harry often had to face those truths suddenly, without warning, and without the time to understand them fully before they became important. Learning in this way does not allow for careful thought, and it does not provide the space to ask questions or to prepare emotionally, and so the knowledge, when it comes, feels heavier, not lighter, because it arrives at the same time as danger. There is also the matter of trust, something that grows slowly, built through honesty, through shared understanding, and through the feeling that one is not being kept in the dark. And while Harry trusted Dumbledore deeply, there were moments when that trust was tested, moments when he realized that things had been hidden from him, that decisions had been made without his knowledge, and that he was part of a plan he did not fully understand. This does not mean that Dumbledore did not care for Harry, because he did, but it shows that care does not always lead to openness, and that even good intentions can create distance when truth is not shared. One of the most important examples of this distance comes from the connection between Harry and Voldemort, something that was known to Dumbledore long before Harry began to understand it himself. And this connection was not just a small detail, but a central part of what Harry would eventually face, something that shaped his experiences, his visions, and his role in the larger conflict. And yet, this truth was not fully explained to him until much later, after he had already experienced its effects, after he had already been placed in situations where understanding it sooner might have changed how he responded. Dumbledore believed that timing was important, that revealing the truth too early could do more harm than good, and this belief guided many of his decisions. But timing is not always easy to judge, and what feels like the right moment from one point of view may come too late from another. For Harry, the delay in understanding often meant that he had to face situations without the clarity that could have helped him, and while he showed courage and strength, those qualities were sometimes tested in ways that could have been less severe if he had been given more information earlier. As the years passed, the gap between what Harry knew and what Dumbledore knew began to close, but it did not happen quickly, and it did not happen without cost, because each piece of truth that was revealed came with its own weight, its own impact, and its own sense of lost time, time that could have been used to prepare, to think, and to understand. By the time Harry learned the full truth of his role, of what was expected of him, and of the path that lay ahead, he was already deeply involved in the conflict, already carrying the burden that Dumbledore had hoped to delay. This raises an important question about the nature of protection, about whether it is better to shield someone from difficult truths or to prepare them for those truths as early as possible. And while there is no single answer that fits every situation, the story of Harry shows us that withholding knowledge can sometimes create more challenges than it prevents, especially in a world where danger does not wait for understanding. Dumbledore's choice to keep secrets was not a simple mistake, and it was not made without thought, but it reflects a deeper pattern in the way he approached difficult decisions, a pattern where he took on the burden of knowledge himself, believing that he could manage it, that he could control when and how others would learn, and that this control would lead to better outcomes. But control over information is not the same as control over events, and even the most careful plan cannot account for everything. In the end, Harry did learn the truth, and he did face what was ahead of him with courage, but the path he took to reach that point was shaped by moments of confusion, by sudden realizations, and by the feeling that there was always something just out of reach, something important that had not yet been explained. This does not take away from his strength, but it reminds us that understanding is not something that should always be delayed, especially when it is tied to survival. And so, when we look at the silence that surrounded Harry's life, we begin to see it not just as a form of protection, but as a choice that carried both care and consequence. A choice that kept him from certain burdens for a time, but also delayed the understanding he needed to face what was coming. It is a quiet example of how even the gentlest intentions can lead to complex outcomes, and how the decision to protect someone from truth can shape their journey in ways that are not always easy, not always safe, and not always what was intended. The Philosopher's Stone Trap. There are plans that feel clever when they are first imagined, plans that seem to solve more than one problem at once. And yet, when those plans are placed into the real world, into a place where people live, learn, and grow, they begin to carry a weight that is not always clear at the beginning. And in the early days of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, one of those plans took shape within the walls of Hogwarts, guided by the careful mind of Albus Dumbledore, a plan that was meant to protect something powerful, but also to draw out a hidden threat, and in doing so, it placed a quiet risk inside a place that was meant to be safe. The object at the center of this plan was the Philosopher's Stone, a magical item that could grant long life and create gold, something that many would desire, but something that, in the wrong hands, could change the balance of the world in dangerous ways, and because of this, it needed to be hidden, protected, and kept far from those who might seek to use it for harm. At first, placing it within Hogwarts might seem like a strong choice, because the school was known to be one of the safest places in the wizarding world, guarded by magic, watched over by skilled teachers, and led by Dumbledore himself, who was trusted more than almost anyone else. But when we look more closely, we begin to see that Hogwarts is not just a fortress, it is also a school filled with children, young students who are still learning, still growing, and still discovering the world around them, and placing something so important, something that could attract danger, inside such a place creates a situation where protection and risk exist side by side. The stone was not hidden in a distant vault, not kept in a place far removed from everyday life, but instead placed within the same castle where students slept, studied, and moved freely. And this decision alone begins to raise questions about the balance between safety and strategy. Dumbledore did not simply hide the stone and leave it unguarded, because he arranged a series of protections, a set of magical challenges designed to prevent anyone from reaching it easily, each one created by a different teacher, each one reflecting their own skills and knowledge, forming a path that was meant to be difficult, even impossible for most. And at first, this seems like a careful and thoughtful approach, because it shows that effort was made to ensure that the stone would not fall into the wrong hands. There was a giant three-headed dog guarding a trapdoor, a series of magical plants that could trap and hold, a flying key challenge that required skill and speed, a life-size chess game that demanded strategy, and other trials that tested logic, courage, and understanding. But as we examine these protections more closely, something becomes clear, something that is easy to overlook when we focus only on the intention, and that is the fact that these challenges, while difficult, were not beyond the reach of students, not completely out of their ability. And this is not just a small detail, but an important part of the situation, because it means that the path to the stone was not sealed away completely, but instead created in a way that could be followed, step by step, by those who were determined enough, curious enough, or perhaps unaware enough to try. This becomes even more important when we consider that the plan was not only about hiding the stone, but also about drawing out someone who was already within Hogwarts, someone who was working in secret, someone who was connected to Lord Voldemort. And this adds another layer to the situation, because it suggests that the protections were not only meant to block, but also to test, to observe, and perhaps even to trap. Dumbledore knew that Voldemort, though weakened, was seeking a way to return to power, and that the stone could offer that chance. And so, by placing it within Hogwarts and surrounding it with challenges, he created a situation where Voldemort, or someone acting for him, might be drawn into the open, From a strategic point of view, this kind of plan can seem effective because it allows the threat to be identified, to be studied, and possibly to be stopped before it grows stronger. But when we bring this strategy into the setting of a school, into a place filled with students who are not part of this plan, who do not fully understand the danger, it becomes clear that the risk is not limited to the intended target. The presence of the stone, the existence of the challenges, and the hidden path leading to it created a kind of mystery within the school, something that curious minds could notice, something that could draw attention. And this is exactly what happened. Harry Potter, along with his friends, became aware that something was being hidden, something important and possibly dangerous. And like many young people faced with a mystery, they felt the need to understand it, to uncover the truth, and to act when they believed something was wrong. This curiosity, while natural, placed them directly into the path that had been created, leading them through the very challenges that were meant to guard the stone. And this is where the situation becomes difficult to ignore, because it shows that the protections, while designed to stop a powerful enemy, also allowed students to reach places they should never have been able to reach. Each challenge, when looked at on its own, seems strong, but together they form a path that can be followed. And when that path is discovered, it becomes less about whether it can be accessed, and more about who will attempt it, and whether they will be prepared for what they find. Harry and his friends did not fully understand the danger they were facing, and yet they moved forward, step by step, solving problems, overcoming obstacles, and placing themselves in situations where one mistake could have led to serious harm. This raises a question that sits quietly beneath the surface of the plan, a question about whether the design of these challenges was truly meant to be impossible, or whether they were created in a way that assumed a certain kind of person would reach the end, someone with the right qualities, the right intentions, and perhaps even the right connection to what was being protected. Because at the final stage, the stone could only be obtained by someone who did not wish to use it, a condition that seems simple but is actually very specific. And this suggests that the plan was not only about protection, but also about selection, about ensuring that only a certain kind of person could succeed. While this may sound like a clever solution, it also creates a situation where the outcome depends on who reaches the end. And when that who includes students who should not have been involved at all, the plan begins to show its risks more clearly. Harry, in the end, faced not just the challenges, but also the person who had been hiding in plain sight, the one who was helping Voldemort, and this confrontation placed him in direct danger, something that might not have happened if the stone had been hidden in a place completely out of reach. Dumbledore's intention may have been to protect the stone and to confront the threat of Voldemort, but the method he chose brought that threat into a space shared with students, and it relied on a system that, while intelligent, was not entirely closed, not entirely secure from those who were not meant to be part of it. This is where the idea of strategy meets the reality of consequence, because even the most carefully planned system can create openings, and when those openings exist in a place where young lives are present, the cost of those openings becomes much more serious. In the end, the stone was protected, and Voldemort did not succeed in using it, but the path to that outcome was not without risk, and it involved moments where students faced danger that was far beyond what they should have encountered. Moments where bravery filled the gap left by incomplete protection, and moments where success depended not only on the plan, but on the actions of those who were never meant to be part of it. And so, when we look at this decision, we see not just a plan to protect something valuable, but a situation where the line between safety and risk was blurred, where a place meant for learning became part of a larger strategy, and where the presence of danger was allowed, even if only for a time, in order to achieve a greater goal. It is a reminder that even the smartest plans can carry unseen risks, and that when those plans involve real people, especially those who are still learning and growing, the consequences can reach further than expected, shaping not only the outcome, but the journey that leads to it. Ignoring the Chamber of Secrets, There are dangers that announce themselves loudly, with clear signs and obvious threats. And then there are dangers that move quietly, hidden in the spaces people stop looking, buried beneath old stories that feel too distant to still matter. And within the walls of Hogwarts, one of those quiet dangers waited for years, its presence known but not fully faced, its history remembered but not truly understood. And when it returned during the time of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, it did not come as something new, but as something that had been left unresolved, something that had been allowed to rest without being fully questioned. At the center of this situation was Albus Dumbledore, a man who had spent many years within the castle, who knew its history, its secrets, and the stories that others treated as myths. And among those stories was the legend of the Chamber of Secrets, a hidden place said to have been created long ago by one of the founders of the school, a place that, according to rumor, held a creature capable of harming those who did not belong. For many, this story was little more than a tale told in whispers, something to be dismissed as imagination. But there had been a time in the past when it felt more real, when students had been attacked, and when fear had moved through the school in a way that could not be ignored. Years before Harry arrived at Hogwarts, the chamber had been opened once, and a student had lost her life, a tragedy that should have left a lasting mark, not only in memory, but in action, in the form of questions that needed to be answered, investigations that needed to be completed, and safeguards that needed to be put in place. But instead, the situation was closed, explained in a way that seemed to settle the matter, and then left behind, as if time alone would be enough to ensure it would not happen again. This is where the first quiet concern begins to form, because when something serious happens, especially something that involves harm within a place meant to be safe, leaving it only partially understood can create a space where the same danger can return, not because it is new, but because it was never fully removed. Dumbledore was not yet the headmaster during that earlier event, but he was present, aware of what had happened, aware of the explanation that had been accepted, and aware that not every detail had been fully clear. When the chamber opened again during Harry's second year, the signs did not appear all at once, but slowly, beginning with strange messages, with fear spreading quietly among students, and then with attacks that left victims frozen, unable to move or speak, their bodies unharmed, but their minds trapped in a state that no one fully understood. These events created a pattern, one that pointed back to the same hidden threat, and yet, even as the pattern became clearer, there was still hesitation, still uncertainty, still a lack of direct and immediate action that could fully address what was happening. Dumbledore did take the situation seriously, and he did begin to consider what might be happening, but the response was not as strong or as fast as the danger required, and this delay allowed the attacks to continue, one after another, each one adding to the fear, each one showing that the threat was not under control. The school remained open, students continued their daily lives, and while there were efforts to protect them, those efforts did not fully remove the risk. And this created a feeling of uncertainty, a sense that something was wrong, but not fully understood. One of the most important questions in this situation is why the chamber had not been fully investigated earlier, why its existence had been treated as a closed matter rather than an ongoing concern. And this question leads us to consider the way decisions were made, the way explanations were accepted, and the way uncertainty was handled. Accepting an incomplete answer can bring a sense of calm, a feeling that the problem has been solved. But if that answer is not correct, it can also create a false sense of security, one that allows the real issue to remain hidden. When the attacks began again, there was an opportunity to revisit the past, to question what had been accepted, to look deeper into the history of the school, and to act with urgency. And yet, this process did not happen as quickly or as clearly as it could have. Instead, there was confusion, suspicion placed on the wrong individuals, and a lack of clear direction that allowed the danger to continue moving through the school. Students were not just observers in this situation, but victims, individuals who were placed in harm's way without fully understanding why, individuals who trusted the school to protect them. and who found themselves facing something that should never have reached them. The attacks were not minor events, and even though the victims did not die, the risk was real, and the outcome could have been far worse if not for a series of small protections that prevented the creature from causing greater harm. The presence of this danger within Hogwarts raises a deeper concern about the balance between knowledge and action, about what it means to be aware of a potential threat and how that awareness should be used. Dumbledore was not ignorant of the possibility that the chamber existed, and he was not unaware of the past events connected to it. And yet, that awareness did not lead to a complete and decisive effort to uncover the truth before it became a danger again. There is also the matter of underestimation, the idea that something believed to be unlikely or distant may not be treated with the urgency it deserves, and this can happen even to those who are wise and experienced. Because when a threat has been quiet for a long time, it can begin to feel less immediate, less real, and easier to set aside. But when that threat returns, it does not return slowly, and it does not wait for people to be ready. And this is what happened within Hogwarts, where something that had been left unresolved suddenly became active again, placing students in danger before a full response could be formed. Dumbledore's role in this situation is not one of direct harm, but one of delayed action, of incomplete investigation, and of a system that did not fully address a known risk. And while he did not cause the chamber to open, the environment in which it remained hidden, unexamined, and misunderstood allowed it to exist as a danger that could return. As the situation grew worse, external pressure increased, leading to Dumbledore being removed from his position for a time. And this removal did not solve the problem, but instead created further instability, showing that the leadership of the school was not fully prepared to handle the situation with confidence and clarity. The absence of strong direction during a crisis only adds to the danger, because it leaves others uncertain about what to do, how to act, and how to protect those at risk. In the end, it was not a formal investigation or a planned response that resolved the situation, but the actions of students, particularly Harry, who followed the clues, faced the danger directly, and brought the truth into the open. This outcome, while successful, highlights a deeper issue, because it shows that the system meant to protect students was not the one that solved the problem, and that the responsibility, in a way, fell on those who should have been protected rather than those who were meant to lead. When we look back on this moment, we do not see a simple failure, but a series of small choices, delays, and assumptions that together created a situation where danger was allowed to grow, where the past was not fully understood, and where the present was not addressed with the urgency it required. It is a quiet reminder that ignoring or underestimating a threat does not remove it, and that leaving something unresolved can allow it to return in ways that are more dangerous than before. And in the stillness that follows the resolution, when the chamber is finally closed and the danger is removed, there remains a question, not only about what happened, but about what could have been done differently, about how a place meant to be safe became the setting for repeated harm, and about how even the most trusted leadership can face moments where uncertainty leads to outcomes that were never intended, but still deeply felt by those who lived through them. Trusting Snape at a cost. Trust can feel like something warm and steady, something that holds people together in times of fear, and yet there is another kind of trust that is quiet and uncertain, something that exists in the space between doubt and belief, something that asks a person to see beyond what is visible and to place faith in what cannot be fully proven. And this is the kind of trust that Albus Dumbledore placed in Severus Snape, a trust that would shape many events, protect many secrets, and at the same time, place many lives in a delicate and dangerous balance. Snape was not an easy person to trust, not someone who inspired comfort or simple confidence, because his past was tied closely to darkness, to the rise of Lord Voldemort, and to choices that had already caused harm. And yet, at some point, something changed, something shifted in a way that led him to turn away from that path, to step into a different role, one that required him to move between two worlds, never fully belonging to either, always carrying the weight of both. Dumbledore saw this change, or at least believed he did, and in that belief, he made a decision that would define the years to come, which was to trust Snape not just as a person, but as a key part of a much larger plan. This trust was not simple, because it did not come with clear proof that could be shown to others, and it was not something that could be easily explained, because much of it depended on private conversations, on promises made in quiet moments, and on an understanding between two individuals that others could not fully see. Dumbledore believed that Snape's loyalty had shifted, that whatever had tied him to Voldemort before had been replaced by something stronger, something rooted in regret, in protection, and in a desire to prevent further harm, and because of this belief, he placed Snape in a position of great importance. Snape became someone who stood close to danger, someone who returned to Voldemort's side not as a true follower, but as a spy, someone who carried information back to Dumbledore, someone who allowed the Order to understand what was happening within the enemy's ranks. And this role was not only dangerous for Snape, but also risky for everyone involved, because it depended entirely on trust, on the belief that Snape would remain loyal even when surrounded by those who expected him to betray that loyalty. There is a certain kind of courage in this, a willingness to believe in someone despite their past, to see beyond what they have done and focus on what they might become. And this is part of what makes Dumbledore's decision understandable, because without taking risks, without offering second chances, it would be difficult to fight against something as powerful as Voldemort. But there is also a cost to this kind of trust, especially when it is placed in someone whose position requires constant deception, constant movement between truth and falsehood, and constant exposure to danger. The idea of double loyalty is not simple, because it asks a person to serve two sides at once, to appear loyal to one while secretly helping the other. And this creates a situation where every action must be carefully balanced, where one mistake, one moment of hesitation, or one misjudged word could reveal everything and lead to consequences that cannot be undone. Snape lived within this tension, always watched, always judged, always at risk of being exposed. And this meant that even when he was acting in service of Dumbledore, his actions could still appear harmful to others. For those outside of this understanding, for those who did not know the full truth, Snape often seemed cruel, unfair, and even dangerous, and this created a divide, a gap between what was known and what was hidden, a gap that Dumbledore chose to maintain, because revealing Snape's true role would have destroyed the entire plan. This secrecy was necessary in one sense, but it also meant that others had to live with uncertainty, had to question Snape's actions, and had to face situations where they could not fully trust someone who was placed in a position of authority. This becomes especially important when we consider the impact on students, particularly on Harry Potter, who experienced Snape not as a hidden ally, but as a teacher who showed open dislike, who treated him with coldness, and who seemed, at times, to be aligned with the very danger Harry was trying to understand. From Harry's point of view, there was no reason to trust Snape, and yet Dumbledore continued to insist that Snape was on their side, without offering an explanation that could fully ease that doubt. This creates a situation where trust becomes fragile, where belief is asked without proof, and where the cost of that belief falls on those who must act without full understanding. Harry and others were placed in positions where they had to accept Dumbledore's judgment, even when it conflicted with what they saw and experienced. And this kind of trust, while necessary for the plan to work, also created tension, confusion, and moments where hesitation could lead to danger. The risk of this fragile trust becomes even clearer when we look at the larger events that unfold, events where Snape's role remains hidden until the very end, events where his actions, though part of a greater plan, contribute to situations where lives are endangered or lost. The nature of his position meant that he could not always act openly to prevent harm, that he had to allow certain events to unfold in order to maintain his cover. And this creates a difficult truth, which is that sometimes, In order to protect the larger plan, smaller losses were allowed to happen. Dumbledore understood this, and he accepted it as part of the strategy, believing that the information Snape provided, the role he played, and the position he held were worth the risks. And this belief reflects the same pattern we have seen before. The idea that a greater goal can justify difficult choices, even when those choices involve uncertainty, even when they involve placing people in situations where they may not be fully protected. One of the most powerful moments that reveals the depth of this trust is the agreement between Dumbledore and Snape regarding Dumbledore's own death, a plan that required complete faith, complete secrecy, and complete acceptance of the consequences. Dumbledore trusted Snape to carry out a task that would change everything, to act in a way that would appear as betrayal to others, and to do so without revealing the truth. And this act, while part of a larger strategy, also deepened the sense of uncertainty around Snape, making it even harder for others to see him as anything other than an enemy. The cost of this trust is not measured only in the success of the plan, but also in the experiences of those who lived through it, in the fear, the confusion, and the moments where people did not know who to trust or what to believe. It is seen in the relationships that were strained, in the trust that was tested, and in the lives that were affected by actions that could not be fully explained at the time. This does not mean that Dumbledore's trust was misplaced, because in the end, Snape did remain loyal to the role he had accepted, and his actions did contribute to the eventual outcome. But it does show that trust, especially of this kind, is not without risk, and that placing such trust in a single person, especially one in such a dangerous position, creates a situation where the margin for error is very small. When we look at this decision, we see not just a belief in redemption, but a reliance on it, a willingness to build a plan around the idea that a person can change, that they can act against their past, and that they can remain steady even under the greatest pressure. And while this belief can lead to powerful outcomes, it also requires a level of certainty that is difficult to maintain, because people are not always predictable, and situations do not always unfold as expected. And so, as we reflect on this quiet and complex trust, we begin to see it as both a strength and a risk, something that allowed important actions to take place, but also something that created uncertainty, tension, and moments of danger for those who were part of the story. It is a reminder that trust, especially when it is placed in someone standing between two sides, is never simple, never fully safe, and always carries with it the possibility that even the strongest belief can lead to outcomes that are difficult, unexpected, and deeply felt by those who depend on it. Letting Draco continue, there are moments when danger is not hidden, not unknown, but quietly understood by those who are watching closely. Moments when a threat does not arrive suddenly, but instead grows slowly, step by step. And during that time, a choice must be made, whether to stop it early or to allow it to continue for reasons that may seem important in the larger picture. And for Albus Dumbledore, one of those moments came during the time when a young student, Draco Malfoy, was given a task far beyond what he was ready to carry, a task that would place not only his own life in danger, but also the lives of many others within Hogwarts. Draco was not a powerful leader, not someone with years of experience or deep understanding of the kind of magic he was being asked to use, but instead a boy who had grown up surrounded by certain beliefs, certain expectations, and a strong connection to a family that had already aligned itself with Lord Voldemort. When Voldemort returned to power, those expectations became something heavier, something more direct, and Draco found himself in a position where he was no longer just a student, but a participant in a larger and more dangerous plan, one that required him to do something he was not prepared for, something that would test not only his ability, but his sense of right and wrong. Dumbledore knew what was happening, or at least understood enough to see the path Draco had been placed on, and this knowledge did not come from guesswork, but from careful observation, from understanding the patterns of behavior, and from knowing how Voldemort operated, how he used fear and pressure to control others, especially those who were young, vulnerable, or tied to him through family. Draco was not acting freely, but under the weight of expectation and threat, and this made the situation more complex, because stopping him was not just about removing a danger, but also about deciding what to do with someone who was both a risk and a victim. Instead of stepping in directly, instead of removing Draco from the situation, or confronting him in a way that would bring the plan to an end, Dumbledore chose to watch, to observe, and to allow events to continue. And this decision was not made lightly, but it was made with a certain belief, a belief that Draco might not fully carry out the task, that he might hesitate, that he might choose not to follow through, and that by allowing him to continue, there might be a chance for something different, something that could prevent a worse outcome. This choice reflects a pattern that appears again and again in Dumbledore's decisions, the idea that waiting, observing, and allowing events to unfold can lead to a better understanding, and sometimes a better result. But it also carries a risk, because while events are unfolding, they are still happening, and during that time, real danger exists, real people are at risk, and real consequences can occur before the final outcome is reached. Draco's attempts to carry out his task were not immediate or direct, but slow, uncertain, and often flawed, because he was not prepared for what he was doing, and this lack of preparation led to mistakes, to actions that did not go as planned, and to situations where the danger spread beyond its intended target. One of the most serious moments came when a cursed object, intended for Dumbledore, ended up harming someone else, a student who had no connection to the plan, someone who became a victim simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. This moment is important because it shows how allowing a dangerous plan to continue, even when the target is known, can lead to unintended harm. And it raises a difficult question about responsibility, because while Draco was the one carrying out the actions, and Voldemort was the one who gave the order, the decision to allow the situation to continue without direct intervention created the conditions in which that harm could occur. It was not an intentional act, but it was a consequence, and consequences do not always follow intention. Another moment followed, one that involved a poisoned drink, another attempt that did not reach its intended target, and again, someone else was placed in danger, someone who had no role in the plan, someone who was simply caught in the path of something that should never have been allowed to move so freely within a place like Hogwarts. These events were not small mistakes, and they were not harmless, but clear signs that the situation was escalating, that the risk was growing, and that the longer it continued, the more likely it was that someone would be seriously harmed or even killed. Dumbledore was aware of these events, and he understood what they meant, and yet he still chose not to stop Draco directly, not to remove him from the situation, and not to bring the plan to an immediate end. And this is where the tension in his decision becomes clear, because it shows a willingness to accept a certain level of risk in order to achieve a larger goal, a goal that involved maintaining a deeper plan, protecting other secrets, and preparing for a confrontation that would come later. There is also the matter of Draco himself, because while he was a source of danger, he was also a young person under pressure, someone who did not fully understand what he was being asked to do, and someone who showed signs of hesitation, of fear, and of doubt. And Dumbledore may have believed that by allowing him to continue, there was a chance for him to step back, to refuse, or to find a different path. And in that sense, the decision to observe rather than intervene can be seen as an attempt to give Draco a choice, to allow him the space to make a decision that could change his future. But while this approach considers Draco's situation, it also places others at risk, because the environment in which he was acting was not isolated, not controlled, but shared with many others. And those others did not have a choice in the matter. They were not part of the decision, and they were not aware of the danger they were facing. This creates a conflict between compassion and responsibility, between the desire to give someone a chance to change and the need to protect those who may be affected by their actions. As the situation moved closer to its final moment, the tension grew, the danger became more direct, and the plan that had been allowed to continue reached a point where it could no longer remain hidden. And when that moment came, when Draco stood face to face with Dumbledore, the weight of everything he had been carrying became clear, because he was not confident, not certain, but afraid, unsure, and struggling with what he had been asked to do. This moment shows that Dumbledore's belief in Draco's hesitation was not entirely misplaced, because Draco did not act immediately, and he did not carry out the task in a simple or direct way. But it also shows that the situation had reached a point where the outcome could not be controlled, where others had become involved, and where the risk had grown beyond what could be safely managed. In the end, the situation did not resolve in a way that removed all danger, and while Dumbledore's larger plan continued, the path to that point included moments where innocent lives were placed in harm's way, moments where the cost of waiting became visible, and moments where action, if taken earlier, might have prevented certain events from occurring. This does not mean that Dumbledore acted without thought or without care, but it shows that even careful decisions can lead to unintended consequences, especially when they involve allowing danger to exist in the hope that it will resolve in a certain way. It is a reminder that observation, while valuable, is not always enough, and that there are times when direct action, even if difficult, may be necessary to prevent harm. And so, when we reflect on this part of the story, we see a decision shaped by understanding, by strategy, and by a desire to guide events toward a certain outcome. But we also see the cost of that decision, the moments where inaction allowed danger to grow, and the lives that were affected by a situation that could have been stopped earlier, but was instead allowed to continue, with all the risks that came with it. The slow return of Voldemort. There are times when danger does not return with a loud sound or a clear sign, but instead comes back slowly, almost quietly, like a shadow that stretches a little farther each day. And in the years after the fall of Lord Voldemort, this is exactly how his presence began to grow again, not as a sudden force that everyone could see and fear at once, but as something uncertain, something that many chose not to believe, and something that required careful attention to even notice at first. Among those who did notice, who understood what was happening even when others doubted it, was Albus Dumbledore, a man who had faced Voldemort before, who knew the signs, and who could see that what seemed like small and scattered events were part of a much larger return. Dumbledore did not need a clear announcement to understand that Voldemort was not truly gone, because he saw the patterns, the strange movements, the quiet changes that others dismissed or ignored, and he began to prepare in his own way, gathering information, watching carefully, and trying to understand how strong Voldemort had become and how quickly he was regaining what he had lost. This careful observation was not without reason, because facing an enemy like Voldemort required more than courage. It required knowledge, timing, and a clear sense of what was at stake. But while Dumbledore understood the danger, he did not move immediately into open confrontation. And this is where the situation becomes more complex, because recognizing a threat and acting on that recognition are not always the same, and the space between those two actions can shape everything that follows. Dumbledore chose to move cautiously, to avoid drawing too much attention too early, and to build a response that could stand against Voldemort when the time came. And this approach, while thoughtful, also created a delay, a period of time where the danger was growing, but not yet fully challenged. Part of this caution came from the uncertainty surrounding Voldemort's condition, because after his initial fall, he was not fully restored, not in the way he had once been, and this meant that confronting him too early might not lead to a clear victory, but instead reveal too much, too soon, and give him the chance to retreat, to hide again, and to return later, even stronger. Dumbledore understood that timing was important, that acting too soon could have its own risks, and so he chose to wait, to gather strength, and to allow events to unfold until the moment felt right. At the same time, there was another challenge, something that made open confrontation even more difficult, and that was the lack of belief from others, particularly from those in positions of power. Many did not accept that Voldemort had returned, even when signs began to appear, and this created a situation where Dumbledore's warnings were not fully supported, where action was limited not only by strategy, but also by the refusal of others to see what was happening. In such a situation, moving openly could have led to conflict not just with Voldemort, but with the very system that was meant to protect the wizarding world. Because of this, Dumbledore worked quietly, rebuilding connections, preparing those who trusted him, and forming a group that would later become known as the Order of the Phoenix, a group that operated outside official structures, working to resist Voldemort's growing influence while others remained uncertain or unwilling to act. This quiet resistance was important, and it allowed some level of preparation, but it also meant that the fight against Voldemort was not as strong or as unified as it could have been if the threat had been accepted earlier. During this time, Voldemort was not idle, and the delay in open confrontation allowed him to move more freely, to gather followers, to rebuild his power, and to strengthen his position in ways that would become harder to challenge later. Each day that passed without direct opposition gave him more time to grow, more time to plan, and more time to spread fear and influence, even if that influence was not yet fully visible to everyone. There is a quiet tension in this period, a sense that something is building beneath the surface, something that is not yet fully seen but is already changing the shape of the world. And within that tension, Dumbledore's caution stands as both a strength and a risk, because while it allows for careful preparation, it also creates space for the enemy to act without immediate resistance. For Harry Potter, this period of uncertainty was especially difficult, because he had seen Voldemort's return. He had faced the reality that others refused to accept, and yet he found himself in a world where that truth was not fully recognized, where his experiences were questioned, and where the danger he knew to be real was treated as something distant or exaggerated. This created a gap between knowledge and action, a space where those who understood the threat could not fully respond to it in the way they needed to. Dumbledore's decision to avoid immediate confrontation also meant that some of the most direct actions against Voldemort were delayed, including efforts to fully uncover and destroy the sources of his power. And while these actions would eventually take place, the time lost in the early stages allowed Voldemort to reach a point where he was no longer weak or hidden, but strong, visible, and ready to act openly. As Voldemort's strength grew, so did the danger, and the quiet return turned into something much more direct, something that could no longer be ignored. And at that point, the cost of delay became clearer, because the enemy that might have been weaker earlier was now stronger. The conflict that might have been contained was now spreading, and the fight that could have begun sooner was now harder to win. This does not mean that Dumbledore was wrong to be cautious, because his understanding of timing, strategy, and preparation was based on experience, and acting without thought could have led to different kinds of failure. But it does show that caution itself carries a cost, especially when it allows an enemy to grow in strength without facing immediate resistance. There is also the question of whether a different approach could have changed the outcome, whether a stronger early response, even with limited support, might have slowed Voldemort's return, or at least made it more difficult. And while these questions do not have clear answers, they remind us that every decision, even one made with care and wisdom, exists within a balance of risk and consequence. Dumbledore's role during this time reflects a deep understanding of the complexity of the situation, but also a reliance on patience that may not have matched the urgency of the threat. And this difference between understanding and action is what shapes the outcome. Because knowing what is happening does not always lead to stopping it in time. As the world moved from uncertainty to open conflict, the space that had once been filled with doubt and hesitation was replaced by fear and urgency, and the need for action became clear. But by then, the situation had changed, the enemy had grown stronger, and the cost of delay was no longer a possibility, but a reality that had to be faced. And so, when we look at this period, we see not just the return of Voldemort, but the way that return was allowed to unfold, slowly, quietly, and with increasing strength, while those who understood the danger moved carefully, perhaps too carefully, through a world that was not yet ready to face the truth. It is a reminder that recognizing a threat is only the first step, and that the timing of action, the balance between caution and urgency, can shape not only how a conflict begins, but how difficult it becomes to end. The isolation of Harry Potter. There are moments when silence is chosen not because there is nothing to say, but because speaking feels too dangerous, too risky, or too heavy. And in the life of Harry Potter, one of those moments stretched across an entire year, a year where the distance between him and Albus Dumbledore became more than just physical, but emotional, quiet, and deeply felt, even if it was never fully explained at the time. This distance did not come from anger or lack of care, but from a decision, a strategy shaped by fear of something unseen, something that moved through thoughts and connections, something tied closely to Lord Voldemort and the growing link between him and Harry. After the events that confirmed Voldemort's return, Harry was no longer just a student learning about magic, but someone directly connected to the danger itself, someone whose mind and experiences were no longer entirely his own, because the connection between him and Voldemort had begun to deepen in ways that were difficult to control or fully understand. Dumbledore knew this, and he understood that Voldemort might be able to use that connection, to see through it, to feel through it, and perhaps even to influence it. And this created a fear that any closeness between himself and Harry might become a weakness, something that Voldemort could use to gain knowledge, or to strike in a way that could not be easily stopped. Because of this, Dumbledore made a choice that seemed, from his point of view, necessary, which was to create distance, to step away, to limit contact, and to avoid forming a close connection that could be seen or felt through the link that Harry carried. It was a quiet form of protection, not one built on spells or barriers, but on absence, on silence, and on the belief that keeping space between them would reduce the risk of Voldemort learning too much or acting too quickly. But while this decision may have had a clear purpose in Dumbledore's mind, its effect on Harry was very different, because what felt like protection from one side felt like rejection from the other. Harry had just faced something terrifying, had just seen Voldemort return, and had lost someone he cared about deeply. And in that moment, what he needed most was understanding, guidance, and reassurance. And yet, instead of being brought closer, he found himself pushed away, left without answers, and surrounded by a silence that he did not understand. The lack of communication was not small, and it was not brief, but extended over time, shaping the way Harry experienced that year, because he was left with questions that had no answers, feelings that had no clear place to go, and a growing sense that he was being kept at a distance for reasons that were never fully explained. This created a kind of tension inside him, a mixture of frustration, confusion, and anger that built slowly, not all at once, but through repeated moments where he expected guidance and found none. Dumbledore's absence was especially noticeable because of how present he had been before, because Harry had come to see him not just as a headmaster, but as someone who understood more than others, someone who could explain what was happening, and someone who could provide a sense of direction when things became unclear. Removing that presence, even with good reason, left a space that was not easily filled, and in that space, uncertainty began to grow. At the same time, the world around Harry was not calm or supportive, because many did not believe him when he spoke about Voldemort's return, and this lack of belief added another layer to his isolation, because it meant that he was not only separated from Dumbledore, but also from those who might have offered support, leaving him in a position where he felt both alone and misunderstood. In such a situation, communication becomes even more important, because it helps to anchor a person, to give them a sense that they are not facing everything by themselves. Instead, Harry was left to navigate his thoughts and feelings without clear guidance, and this led to moments where his reactions became stronger, more intense, and sometimes harder to control, not because he lacked strength, but because he was carrying too much without the support he needed. Anger became one of the ways this pressure showed itself, not as a constant emotion, but as something that appeared when the weight became too much, when the silence felt too heavy, and when the lack of answers created more questions instead of clarity. This anger was not without reason, because from Harry's point of view, he had done what was asked of him. He had faced danger, told the truth, and trusted those around him. And yet, he was being treated as though he needed to be kept at a distance, as though he could not be trusted with the information that directly affected him. This creates a difficult situation, because trust, once formed, depends on openness, and when that openness is removed, even for good reasons, it can weaken the connection that was once strong. There is also the matter of confusion, because without explanation, actions can feel unclear. And when someone important steps away without telling you why, it can lead to many different thoughts, some of which may not be accurate, but feel real in the moment. Harry did not know the full reason for Dumbledore's distance, and without that knowledge, he was left to interpret it on his own, to try to understand something that had not been explained, and this made the situation even more difficult. The connection between Harry and Voldemort continued to grow during this time, and without clear guidance, Harry was not fully prepared to understand or manage it, and this lack of preparation made him more vulnerable, not just to the connection itself, but to the ways it could be used against him. There were moments when Voldemort was able to influence what Harry saw, to guide his thoughts in certain directions, and without a full understanding of how this connection worked, Harry was left exposed to something he could not fully control. Dumbledore's strategy was meant to protect, to reduce the risk of Voldemort gaining access to important information, but it also created a situation where Harry faced that connection without the support and understanding he needed. And this shows the complexity of the decision, because it balanced one kind of protection against another kind of risk. By stepping back, Dumbledore reduced one danger, but allowed another to grow. As the year moved forward, the effects of this isolation became clearer, not just in Harry's emotions, but in the way events unfolded, because the lack of communication meant that certain truths were not shared in time, certain warnings were not given clearly, and certain preparations were delayed. This delay did not come from a lack of care, but from the belief that distance was necessary, and yet, it shows how even well-meaning strategies can create gaps, spaces where important things are left unsaid until it is too late. When the truth was finally revealed, when Dumbledore explained why he had chosen to stay away, it provided clarity, but it also showed how much had been lost in the time before that explanation, how much confusion had grown, and how much strain had been placed on someone who was already carrying more than most. The explanation did not erase the experience, and it did not remove the effects of that isolation, but it helped to show that the distance had not come from a lack of care, but from a decision that had been made with a specific purpose. And yet, even with that understanding, the consequences remain important, because they remind us that emotional distance, even when used as a strategy, can have real effects, that silence can create its own kind of harm, and that protecting someone does not only involve keeping them safe from danger, but also supporting them through the experience of that danger. In the end, Harry continued forward, stronger, more aware, and more prepared. But the path he took during that year was shaped by a sense of isolation that did not need to be as strong as it was, a sense of being pushed away at a time when closeness might have provided not just comfort, but clarity. It is a quiet example of how even careful decisions can lead to outcomes that are not fully intended, and how the balance between protection and connection is not always easy to maintain. And in that balance, in the space between what was meant and what was felt, we see the true weight of the decision, not just as a strategy, but as an experience that shaped a person, that influenced how he faced the world, and that reminds us that even silence, even distance, can carry consequences that echo far beyond the moment in which they were chosen. The Department of Mysteries. There are moments in a story where everything seems to move at once, where thoughts, fears, and choices come together and push someone forward before they have the time to fully understand what is happening. And for Harry Potter, one of those moments led him away from the safety of Hogwarts, and into a place hidden deep within the Ministry of Magic, a place known as the Department of Mysteries, where answers were stored, but where danger waited just as quietly. This moment did not begin with a clear plan, but with a vision, something seen and felt through a connection that had already proven to be uncertain and difficult to trust, a connection tied directly to Lord Voldemort. The vision Harry saw was not calm or distant, but urgent, filled with fear, showing someone he cared about, Sirius Black, in danger, held and threatened, as if time was already running out. For Harry, this was not something he could ignore, because it felt real, immediate, and deeply personal. And in that moment, his need to act became stronger than his need to question, stronger than his hesitation, and stronger than the quiet warnings that might have told him to stop and think. This is where the situation begins to unfold, not through a simple mistake, but through a chain of choices shaped by emotion, by incomplete understanding, and by the absence of guidance at a critical time. Dumbledore had known that the connection between Harry and Voldemort could be used in this way, that visions could be sent, that thoughts could be influenced, and that what Harry saw might not always be true. And because of this, there had been attempts to teach Harry how to protect his mind, how to close himself off from that connection, but those lessons were not fully successful. And the distance that had existed between Harry and Dumbledore during that time meant that this understanding was not as strong as it needed to be. Harry knew the connection existed, but he did not fully understand how dangerous it could be, or how easily it could be used against him. This is where the idea of manipulation becomes clear, not as something loud or obvious, but as something subtle, something that works through trust, through fear, and through the natural desire to protect someone we care about. Voldemort did not force Harry to go to the Ministry, and he did not command him directly, but instead created a situation where Harry would choose to go on his own, believing that he was acting to save someone, when in reality, he was being guided into a trap. This kind of manipulation is powerful because it does not feel like control, it feels like a choice, and that makes it much harder to resist. The Department of Mysteries itself is a place that feels distant and quiet, filled with objects and knowledge that are not meant to be easily understood, a place where ideas like time, memory, and prophecy are studied, and where the unknown is kept behind closed doors. It is not a place for students, not a place for young people still learning about the world, and yet, through a series of urgent decisions, Harry and his friends found themselves entering this space, moving deeper into its halls, without fully knowing what they would find or what they were facing. At the center of Voldemort's plan was a prophecy, something that held meaning, something that connected directly to both him and Harry, and something he wanted to hear in full, because without hearing it himself, he could not fully understand what it meant for his future. The prophecy was protected, not easily accessible, and Voldemort could not retrieve it himself without risking exposure, and so he used Harry, guiding him through the vision, drawing him to the place where the prophecy was kept, and relying on the connection between them to bring him exactly where he needed to be. This is where the situation becomes not just dangerous, but carefully constructed, because everything depended on Harry believing the vision, on him acting quickly, and on him not having the full information needed to question what he saw. If Harry had understood the connection more deeply, if he had known how easily it could be used, if he had trusted that what he saw might not be real, the outcome might have been different. But without that understanding, he acted in the way many would act when faced with the danger of losing someone they care about. The moment Harry and his friends entered the Department of Mysteries, the trap was already in place, waiting not with immediate attack, but with silence, with the kind of stillness that suggests something is about to happen, and when it did, it came quickly, as members of Voldemort's group appeared, revealing that the situation had been planned, that the vision had been false, and that Harry had been led there for a purpose that had nothing to do with saving Sirius, but everything to do with obtaining the prophecy. The realization that the vision was not real came too late, and by that time, the danger was no longer something that could be avoided, but something that had to be faced. And this is where the cost of the earlier decisions becomes clear, because the lack of understanding, the delayed communication, and the incomplete preparation all came together in this moment, creating a situation where Harry was not only in danger, but responsible for bringing others into that danger as well. The fight that followed was not small or contained, but chaotic and intense, involving both Harry's group and members of the Order of the Phoenix who arrived to help. And within that conflict, spells were cast, spaces were destroyed, and the quiet rooms of the Department of Mysteries became the setting for something far more violent than they were meant to hold. Among those who came to protect Harry was Sirius Black, someone who had always been a source of support and connection for him, someone who represented not just family, but belonging. Sirius entered the fight with determination, with the same energy that had always defined him, but in a moment that passed quickly, in a space filled with movement and danger, he was struck by a spell that sent him through a veil, a mysterious barrier that existed within the department, and once he passed through it, he did not return. His death was not long or drawn out, but sudden, final, and deeply felt, leaving behind a silence that no words could fill. This moment is one of the clearest examples of how a chain of decisions can lead to an outcome that was never intended, because Sirius was not meant to be the target. He was not the reason for the trap, and yet, he became the one who paid the cost. Voldemort's plan was to obtain the prophecy, but the path that plan took, the manipulation, the movement of people into that space, and the conflict that followed, all led to a loss that could not be undone. Dumbledore's role in this situation is not one of direct action, but of preparation that was incomplete, of knowledge that was not fully shared, and of a connection that was not fully understood in time. He knew the risks of the connection between Harry and Voldemort, and he attempted to address it, but the delay, the distance, and the lack of full communication created a gap, and in that gap, Voldemort was able to act. This does not mean that Dumbledore intended this outcome, because he did not, and it does not mean that he caused it directly, but it shows how even careful plans can leave spaces where danger can enter, and how those spaces can grow when communication and preparation are not as strong as they need to be. The loss of Sirius is not just a moment of grief, but a point where the cost of earlier choices becomes visible, where the impact of delay, distance, and incomplete understanding comes together in a way that cannot be ignored. For Harry, this moment changes everything, because it shows him not only the reality of the danger he is facing, but also the weight of the decisions that led him there. The understanding that acting without full knowledge can have consequences that reach beyond what he can control, and the realization that the people he cares about can be affected by those choices in ways that cannot be reversed. And in the quiet that follows, in the space left behind after the battle ends, there remains a question that is not easily answered. A question about how things might have been different if the connection had been understood more clearly, if the warning had been stronger, or if the distance between knowledge and action had been smaller. It is a question that does not change what happened, but helps us see it more clearly, not as a single mistake, but as the result of many small decisions, each one shaping the path that led to that moment. In the end, the Department of Mysteries becomes more than just a place within the Ministry, because it represents the unknown, the unseen forces that shape events, and the way knowledge, when incomplete, can lead to outcomes that are difficult and deeply felt. It is a reminder that understanding is not just about knowing what is happening, but about sharing that knowledge in time, about preparing for what may come, and about recognizing that even the smallest gap between truth and action can become a space where danger grows. Raising a child for sacrifice. There are truths that feel heavy not because they are loud or violent, but because they sit quietly in the background, shaping choices long before they are spoken aloud. And in the life of Harry Potter, one of those truths existed from a very early point, hidden within a larger plan that only a few understood. A truth that would not be fully revealed until much later, when the pieces finally came together and showed a path that had been forming all along. At the center of that path was Albus Dumbledore, a man who carried knowledge that others did not have, knowledge about the nature of Lord Voldemort, about the way he had tied his life to objects and fragments of his soul, and about the connection that existed between Voldemort and Harry himself. This connection was not simple, and it was not something that could be easily removed, because when Voldemort attempted to destroy Harry as a baby, something unexpected happened, something that neither he nor anyone else had planned. And in that moment, a part of Voldemort's soul attached itself to Harry, not as a clear or visible thing, but as something hidden, something that would remain inside him without his knowledge. Dumbledore came to understand this over time, through careful thought, through observation, and through the pieces of information he gathered about Voldemort's methods. And when he reached this understanding, he also realized something else, something far more difficult to accept. If a part of Voldemort lived within Harry, then destroying Voldemort completely would require that part to be destroyed as well. And since it was attached to Harry, this meant that Harry himself would have to face death in order for the final defeat of Voldemort to be possible. This was not a conclusion reached quickly, and it was not one that could be easily shared, because it carried a weight that would be almost impossible for a child to bear. And so Dumbledore held this knowledge quietly, allowing Harry to grow, to learn, and to become stronger, while knowing that the path ahead would lead to a moment where a choice would have to be made. This is where the idea of planning becomes something more complex, because Dumbledore did not simply react to events as they happened, but guided them, shaped them, and prepared for what he believed would be necessary. And in doing so, he allowed Harry to move forward along a path that was not fully his own, a path that had been influenced by decisions made long before he could understand them. Harry was not told the full truth from the beginning, and this meant that his choices, while real and meaningful, were made within a limited understanding, one that did not include the full cost of what he would eventually face. This raises a question that is difficult but important, a question about whether it is right to guide someone toward a sacrifice they do not fully understand, even if that sacrifice could save many others. Dumbledore believed that Harry needed time, that he needed to grow into someone who could make that choice willingly, rather than being forced into it. And this belief shaped the way he handled the situation, the way he delayed the truth, and the way he prepared Harry without revealing everything at once. There is a certain care in this approach, a desire to protect Harry from the full weight of his role for as long as possible, and to allow him to experience life, friendship, and growth before facing the final reality. But there is also a deeper concern, because guiding someone toward a sacrifice, even with good intentions, can still limit their freedom, can still shape their path in ways they did not choose, and can still place them in a position where the outcome has been decided long before they understand it. The idea of sacrifice itself is not new in this story, because Harry's life was already shaped by the sacrifice of his mother, a moment of love that protected him and allowed him to survive. And this connection between love and sacrifice becomes a central theme, something that appears again and again. But when it comes to Harry's own role, the nature of that sacrifice becomes more complicated, because it is not just about protecting someone in a single moment, but about a planned event, something that has been anticipated, prepared for, and built into the larger strategy. Dumbledore did not treat Harry as someone without value, and he did not see him as a simple tool, but he did place him within a plan where his death was a possible and even necessary outcome. And this creates a tension between care and strategy, between seeing someone as a person and also as a key part of a larger goal. It is this tension that makes the situation difficult to fully accept, because it shows how even good intentions can lead to choices that feel uncomfortable when viewed closely. When Harry finally learns the truth, when he understands what must happen, the moment is not one of confusion, but of clarity. A quiet and powerful realization that everything he has experienced has been leading to this point, and that the choice he now faces is not one that can be avoided. He is not forced in a direct way, but the circumstances, the knowledge, and the understanding of what is at stake all come together to guide him toward a decision that aligns with what Dumbledore had expected. This moment brings us back to an idea that appeared earlier in Dumbledore's life, the idea of the greater good, a belief that actions can be justified if they lead to a better outcome for more people. And while Dumbledore had moved away from this idea in its more extreme form, traces of it remain in the way he approaches this situation, because he is willing to accept a difficult outcome for one person in order to protect many others. The difference is that this time, the choice is not made in a moment of youthful certainty, but in a place of experience, regret, and careful thought. And yet, the core idea remains that a greater goal can require a personal cost. This raises an ethical question that does not have a simple answer, a question about whether it is right to prepare someone for a sacrifice, even if that sacrifice is necessary, and whether the act of guiding them toward that moment changes the nature of their choice. If Harry had been told everything from the beginning, would he have made the same decisions? Would he have followed the same path? Or would the knowledge have changed him in ways that could not be predicted? Dumbledore chose not to answer these questions directly, but instead to shape the path in a way that allowed Harry to arrive at the truth gradually, to understand it step by step, and to make the final choice with a sense of awareness that came from experience rather than instruction. This approach reflects a belief in Harry's ability to choose, but it also reflects a decision to control the timing and the flow of information, to guide rather than to fully reveal. The cost of this approach is not just in the final moment, but in the journey leading up to it, in the way Harry's life was shaped by decisions he did not fully understand, and in the way his role was defined long before he could accept it. It is a reminder that even when a choice is made freely, the path leading to that choice can influence how it is made and can shape the way a person sees their options. In the end, Harry does choose to face what is ahead, to accept the risk, and to act in a way that reflects both courage and understanding. And this choice becomes one of the most powerful moments in the story, not because it was planned, but because it was accepted, because it was made with full awareness, and because it reflects the kind of person Harry had become. And yet, the question remains, not about Harry's choice, but about the path that led him there, about the decisions that shaped that path, and about the role Dumbledore played in guiding it. It is a question that does not have a clear answer, because it exists in a space where intention, outcome, and responsibility meet, and where even the best intentions can lead to difficult truths. In that quiet space, we begin to see the full weight of the decision, not just as part of a plan, but as a moment that reflects the complexity of leadership, the challenge of balancing care with necessity, and the reality that even the wisest choices can carry a cost that is deeply personal, deeply human, and impossible to fully ignore. The Horcrux hunt and its dangers. There are journeys that begin with a clear map, with guidance that explains every step, every danger, and every choice. And then there are journeys that begin with only fragments, with hints and memories, and with a quiet understanding that the path ahead will not be easy to follow. And when Harry Potter, along with Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, set out to find and destroy the Horcruxes, their journey was not guided by a full plan, but by pieces left behind, by lessons that were not complete, and by a responsibility that felt far larger than anything they had faced before. This journey did not begin in a classroom, and it did not follow the rules of learning, but instead moved into a world filled with uncertainty, where each step could lead to danger, and where the weight of the task rested on those who were still, in many ways, growing and learning. At the center of this journey was the knowledge that Lord Voldemort had divided his soul into multiple parts, hiding those parts within objects known as Horcruxes, and that in order to truly defeat him, each of these Horcruxes had to be found and destroyed. This was not a simple task, and it was not something that could be completed quickly, because the Horcruxes were hidden, protected, and often tied to places or objects that carried deep meaning, and finding them required not only courage, but also understanding, patience, and a willingness to face the unknown. Albus Dumbledore had begun this work before his death, and he had shared some of what he knew with Harry, but not everything. And when the time came for Harry and his friends to continue the task, They were left with only a limited amount of guidance, a few memories, a few clues, and a general understanding of what needed to be done, but without clear directions on how to do it. This limited guidance created a situation where they had to rely on their own judgment, their own instincts, and their own ability to piece together information that was often incomplete or difficult to interpret. This is where the danger of the journey becomes clear, because while the goal was known, the path to reach that goal was not, and this meant that each step carried a risk, not just of failure, but of harm. Because the world outside Hogwarts was no longer safe, and the forces working for Voldemort were active, searching, and ready to act against anyone who stood in their way. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were not trained soldiers, not experienced leaders, but young people who had been placed in a position where they had to take on a task that was essential to the outcome of the war. The idea of sending them into this situation is not simple, because it raises questions about preparation, about responsibility, and about what it means to place such a burden on those who are still learning about the world. Dumbledore believed that Harry was the one who had to complete this task, that his connection to Voldemort, his experiences, and his role in the larger story made him uniquely suited to face what was ahead, and in that belief, he allowed the responsibility to pass to him, even though it meant facing dangers that were far beyond what would normally be expected of someone his age. Ron and Hermione chose to stand beside Harry, not because they were required to, but because they believed in him, because they understood the importance of the task, and because they were willing to share the burden, even when they did not fully understand what it would demand from them. Their presence made the journey possible, because without them, Harry would not have been able to continue, but it also meant that the risk was shared, that the danger extended to more than one person, and that the outcome of the journey would affect all of them in ways that could not be easily undone. The lack of clear guidance meant that the journey was often uncertain, filled with moments where decisions had to be made without knowing whether they were correct, where time was spent searching without finding answers, and where the weight of not knowing became a challenge in itself. This uncertainty created tension, not just in the world around them, but within their group, because when people face difficulty without clear direction, it can lead to frustration, doubt, and moments where even strong friendships are tested. One of the most difficult aspects of the journey was the presence of the Horcruxes themselves, because they were not just objects, but carried a kind of influence, a darkness that affected those who were near them, making thoughts heavier, emotions stronger, and conflicts more intense. This influence added another layer of danger, because it did not attack the body directly, but instead affected the mind, creating moments where trust was challenged, where anger grew more quickly, and where the strength needed to continue became harder to hold on to. These challenges show that the journey was not just physical, but also emotional, and that the burden placed on Harry, Ron, and Hermione was not only about finding and destroying objects, but about enduring the effects of the path itself, about staying together when it would be easier to fall apart, and about continuing forward even when the outcome felt uncertain. The risks they faced were constant, because they were moving through a world where danger could appear at any moment, where they could be discovered, captured, or attacked, and where every decision had to be made carefully, even when there was little time to think. They had to find places to hide, to move without being seen, and to gather information without revealing themselves, all while carrying the responsibility of their task, and all without the support of a larger group or a clear system to guide them. This situation highlights one of the most important concerns about the plan, which is the level of risk placed on individuals who were not fully prepared for it. And while their courage and determination allowed them to continue, it does not remove the fact that the burden itself was heavy, and that the path they were following was one filled with dangers that could have led to loss at any moment. Dumbledore's role in this is not one of direct presence, because he was no longer there to guide them, to answer questions, or to provide support in the moment. And this absence made the journey even more difficult, because it meant that the responsibility he had carried now rested entirely on Harry and those with him. The guidance he had given was valuable, but it was not complete, and the gaps in that guidance had to be filled through experience, through trial and error, and through the strength of those who continued the task. As the journey moved forward, each Horcrux they found and destroyed brought them closer to their goal, but also showed the cost of that progress, because each step required effort, risk, and the willingness to face something dangerous without full certainty of success. It was not a path of clear victories, but one of slow movement, of setbacks, and of moments where continuing felt harder than stopping, and yet they continued, not because the path was easy, but because they understood what would happen if they did not, and this understanding gave them the strength to move forward, even when the burden felt too heavy, even when the risks felt too great, and even when the outcome was not guaranteed. When we look at this journey, we see more than just a mission to defeat Voldemort. We see the cost of that mission, the weight placed on those who carried it, and the way in which responsibility can shape a person's path, even when that responsibility comes before they are fully ready to bear it. It is a reminder that courage does not remove risk, and that even the most important goals can come with challenges that are deeply personal and difficult to face. And in that long and uncertain journey, we begin to understand the full meaning of the burden that was placed on Harry, Ron, and Hermione, not just as a task to be completed, but as a path that tested their strength, their trust, and their ability to continue in the face of something that was always larger than they were, and always waiting just beyond the next step. Accepting his own death. There are moments when a person does not just face the idea of death, but chooses to walk toward it with clear understanding, not because they want to end their life, but because they believe that doing so will shape what comes next in a way that might protect others. And in the final stage of his life, Albus Dumbledore reached one of those moments, a point where his own death became part of a plan, not an accident, not a failure, but a decision made with purpose, even if that purpose carried a cost that would be felt long after he was gone. This situation did not begin suddenly, but developed over time, especially after Dumbledore was injured by a powerful curse while seeking one of the objects connected to Lord Voldemort. A curse that slowly spread through his body, weakening him and making it clear that his time was limited. This injury changed the way he saw the future, because it meant that he would not be present for the final stages of the conflict, and that whatever he wanted to achieve would have to be set in motion before he was no longer able to guide it directly. At the same time, there was another problem, one that had been growing quietly within Hogwarts, connected to Draco Malfoy and the task he had been given, a task that required him to kill Dumbledore as a way of proving loyalty and securing his place within Voldemort's plans. Dumbledore understood that Draco was not acting freely, that he was under pressure, and that forcing him to carry out this task would not only end Dumbledore's life, but also place Draco in a position that could shape the rest of his life in a way that might be difficult to escape. This is where the arrangement between Dumbledore and Severus Snape becomes important, because Dumbledore chose not to allow the situation to unfold without guidance, but instead created a plan, one that would bring his life to an end in a controlled way, and at the same time protect Draco from becoming a killer, while also maintaining Snape's position within Voldemort's circle. This plan required a level of trust that was both deep and fragile, because it depended on Snape carrying out an action that would appear to be betrayal, but was in fact part of a larger strategy. The agreement was simple in its structure, but complex in its meaning, because Dumbledore asked Snape to be the one to end his life, to take that responsibility upon himself, and to do so at the right moment, when the situation required it, and when it would serve the larger plan. This request was not made lightly, and it was not something that Snape accepted without difficulty, because it required him to act against someone he respected, someone he had worked with, and someone who trusted him completely. For Dumbledore, this decision was not about control alone, but about shaping the outcome in a way that would serve multiple purposes at once, because by allowing Snape to be the one to kill him, he ensured that Snape would remain trusted by Voldemort, that Draco would not have to carry out the act himself, and that the transition of power within Hogwarts would occur in a way that maintained a certain level of order, even in the face of chaos. But while this plan may seem careful and thoughtful, it also raises important questions about the cost of such a decision, because allowing one's own death to serve a strategic purpose means accepting that life itself can become part of a larger calculation, something that can be shaped and directed to achieve a specific outcome. This idea connects back to earlier choices in Dumbledore's life, to the belief that certain actions, even difficult ones, can be justified if they lead to a greater result. And while this belief is not as extreme as it once was, it still appears in a quieter form, guiding decisions that involve risk, sacrifice, and the acceptance of loss. When the moment finally comes, when Dumbledore stands on the tower at Hogwarts, weakened by the curse and surrounded by events that have moved beyond his direct control, the plan reaches its final stage. And in that moment, he does not resist, he does not attempt to escape, but instead accepts what is about to happen, trusting that the decision he made will lead to the outcome he intended. Snape carries out the act, and in doing so, fulfills the agreement, ending Dumbledore's life in a way that appears to confirm his loyalty to Voldemort, while hiding the truth of what had been arranged. This moment is often seen as a turning point, not just because of the loss of Dumbledore, but because of what it represents, which is the end of a certain kind of guidance, the removal of a figure who had long been a source of direction, and the beginning of a period where others must move forward without that presence. The vacuum left behind is not just about leadership, but about understanding, because Dumbledore had held much of the knowledge that guided the fight against Voldemort, and without him, that knowledge was no longer easily accessible. Harry, in particular, felt this absence deeply, because he had come to rely on Dumbledore not only for answers, but for a sense of clarity in a world that was often confusing and uncertain. And without that guidance, he was left to continue the journey with only the pieces that had been given to him, pieces that were important but not complete. This shift placed a new kind of responsibility on him, one that was no longer supported by the presence of someone who could explain, guide, or correct. The vacuum of leadership also affected the wider wizarding world, because Dumbledore had been a symbol of resistance, a figure that many trusted to stand against Voldemort. And with his death, that sense of stability was shaken, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Those who opposed Voldemort lost a central figure, and those who supported him saw an opportunity to move forward more openly, to act without the same level of resistance that had existed before. This change shows how the loss of a single individual, especially one in a position of influence, can affect many others, not just in terms of direct action, but in the way people think, feel, and respond to what is happening around them. Leadership is not only about making decisions, but about providing a sense of direction, and when that direction is removed, even strong individuals can find themselves uncertain about the path ahead. Dumbledore's decision to accept his own death was not made without thought, and it was not without purpose, but it also created a situation where the consequences extended beyond what he could control, because once he was gone, the plan had to continue without him, and those who remained had to interpret his intentions, follow his guidance, and make their own decisions based on what they understood. This creates a final tension in his choice, because while his death served a strategic purpose, it also removed the very person who could ensure that the strategy was carried out as intended, leaving behind a plan that depended on others to complete it, and on circumstances that could not be fully predicted. It is a reminder that even the most careful plans can become uncertain when the person guiding them is no longer present. And so, when we reflect on this moment, we see not just an act of sacrifice, but a decision that carries both intention and consequence, a choice that was meant to protect, to guide, and to shape the future, but also one that left behind a space that could not be easily filled. It is a quiet and powerful example of how accepting death can become part of a larger plan, and how that plan, even when carefully designed, must continue in a world that is no longer shaped by the one who created it. In that space, between what was intended and what followed, we begin to understand the full weight of the decision, not just as an ending, but as a transition, one that moved the responsibility from one person to many, and one that shows how even the most thoughtful choices can carry outcomes that reach far beyond the moment in which they are made. Legacy, wisdom, or warning. There are stories that end with clear answers, with a simple understanding of who was right and who was wrong. But there are also stories that leave something behind, something quieter, something that stays in the mind long after the events have passed. And the life of Albus Dumbledore is one of those stories, because it does not settle into a single idea, but instead invites us to look more closely, to weigh what was done against what happened, and to sit with the question of what his legacy truly means. For many, Dumbledore is remembered as a protector, someone who stood against darkness, someone who understood the danger of Lord Voldemort when others refused to see it, and someone who worked, often quietly, to prepare the world for a fight that could not be avoided. He guided students, supported those who resisted fear, and created a space where knowledge and courage could grow, even in times of uncertainty. These actions are not small, and they are not easily dismissed, because they reflect a deep commitment to protecting others, even when the path to doing so was not clear. But when we look closer, when we move beyond the surface of these actions, we begin to see that protection does not always come without cost, and that even the strongest intentions can lead to outcomes that are difficult to accept. Dumbledore's choices were not made in a simple world, and they were not free from risk. And because of this, the consequences of those choices reach far beyond what he may have intended, touching the lives of many, shaping events in ways that are both powerful and complex. There is a pattern that runs quietly through his decisions, a pattern of seeing the larger picture, of thinking beyond the present moment, and of acting in ways that are meant to guide the future rather than respond only to the present. This ability to see further than others is often what made him effective, because it allowed him to prepare for things that others did not yet understand, and it gave him the ability to shape events in ways that could lead to a greater outcome. But this same ability also created distance, because focusing on the larger picture can sometimes mean overlooking the smaller details, the individual experiences, and the immediate effects of a decision. When we consider the question of whether Dumbledore was a protector or a strategist willing to sacrifice lives, the answer does not rest easily on one side, because both ideas exist within his actions. He protected, but he also planned, and those plans often involved risks that others had to carry, risks that sometimes led to harm, even when the intention was to prevent something worse. This dual nature is what makes his legacy difficult to define, because it does not fit into a simple category, and it does not allow for an easy judgment. Take, for example, the way he guided Harry Potter, not only as a student, but as someone who would play a central role in the conflict with Voldemort. Dumbledore cared for Harry. This is clear in the way he protected him, the way he watched over him, and the way he believed in his ability to do what needed to be done. But at the same time, he also placed Harry on a path that involved danger, uncertainty, and eventually the possibility of sacrifice. This does not erase the care, but it complicates it, because it shows that protecting someone can sometimes involve preparing them for something difficult, something that goes beyond simple safety. The same can be said for the way he handled knowledge, choosing what to share and what to keep hidden, believing that timing was important and that too much information too early could cause harm. This belief shaped many events, and while it came from a place of caution, it also created moments where others were left unprepared, where understanding came too late, and where the cost of that delay became clear in ways that could not be reversed. There is also the matter of trust, particularly in people like Severus Snape, where Dumbledore chose to believe in something that others could not see, to rely on loyalty that was hidden, and to build a plan around that belief. This trust was not without result, and it played an important role in the outcome of the larger conflict, but it also created uncertainty, moments where actions were misunderstood, and situations where the truth was not clear until much later. When we step back and look at all of these elements together, We begin to see that Dumbledore's legacy is not one of simple success or failure, but of complexity, of choices that were made with care, but that did not always lead to perfect outcomes. This does not make him less important, and it does not remove the impact of what he achieved, but it does remind us that greatness does not remove the possibility of harm, and that even the most respected figures can make decisions that carry consequences beyond what they intended. There is something quiet in this realization, something that does not demand a strong reaction, but instead asks for reflection, because it shows that understanding a person fully means accepting both what they did well and what they did imperfectly, and seeing how those things exist together rather than separately. Dumbledore was not a figure of simple good or simple strategy, but someone who moved between those ideas, sometimes protecting, sometimes planning, and often doing both at the same time. The question of intention versus consequence is one that does not have a single answer, because intentions can be kind, thoughtful, and focused on helping others, and yet still lead to outcomes that are difficult and sometimes painful. Dumbledore intended to protect the wizarding world, to prevent Voldemort from gaining power, and to guide those who would stand against him, and in many ways, he succeeded in those goals. But the path to that success included moments where others were placed in danger, where lives were affected, and where the cost of the plan became something that could not be ignored. This does not mean that his actions were wrong in a simple sense, but it does mean that they cannot be seen without considering their full impact, without looking at both the intention and the result, and without recognizing that even the best plans can carry risks that cannot be fully controlled. It is this balance that defines his legacy, not as something perfect, but as something real, shaped by decisions that were made in a world where every choice mattered. As we come to the end of this reflection, there is a sense of stillness, a quiet understanding that does not close the story, but leaves it open, not for doubt, but for thought. Dumbledore's life does not offer a simple lesson, but a series of questions about leadership, about responsibility, about the balance between protecting and guiding, and about the cost of decisions made in pursuit of something greater. And in that stillness, we come to a realization that feels both simple and deep, which is that greatness is not the absence of mistakes, and wisdom is not the guarantee of perfect outcomes, but rather the ability to act, to choose, and to carry the consequences of those choices, even when they are not easy to accept. Dumbledore's legacy, then, is not just a story of victory, but a reminder that even those who guide others must also face the results of what they have done, and that true understanding comes not from ignoring those results, but from seeing them clearly and allowing them to shape how we think about what it means to lead, to protect, and to choose in a world where every action leaves a mark. And now, as our journey through the choices of Albus Dumbledore slowly comes to rest, the weight of each decision begins to soften, like echoes fading gently through the quiet halls of Harry Potter universe, where every story, no matter how complex, eventually settles into stillness. The questions we carried of wisdom, of sacrifice, of intention and consequence no longer press so strongly, but drift like distant thoughts, calm and unhurried. Perhaps what remains is not judgment, but understanding that even the greatest minds walk uncertain paths, and even the brightest light can cast quiet shadows. And in that understanding, there is a kind of peace, a gentle acceptance that stories are not meant to be perfect, only felt. So as the world grows quiet around you, and the weight of these thoughts slowly lifts, you can let them drift away, like pages closing one by one, until only stillness remains. And in that stillness, you may now rest,